Lars, I don't know that even fairly knowledgeable college football fans across the nation understand the level of rivalry of Washington, Oregon. We did see it as obviously two of the best games in the country. The matchup was phenomenal this past year. They closed out the Pac-12. Now this rivalry moves into the Big Ten. If Kalen DeBoer was still around, Washington would be on equal or better footing. Of course, they won the two games, but are Washington fans, you in particular, a bit concerned that Oregon enters in a much better place than Washington going to the Big Ten?
Yeah, I do think that is a concern for Washington because everything that Kalen DeBoer built up, and now you can say, "Hey, we beat Oregon three straight times, beat him in the Pac-12 championship." That's cool, and that's a good history lesson for the future. But moving forward, right now, at least at this point in time, now again, the roster could be different, and maybe Jed Fish pulls the rabbit out of a hat. But I do think, without question, Dan Lanning has more going into the Big Ten with Oregon than Jed Fish does with Washington. Now it'll be curious to see, can all those resources that Dan Lanning has in Oregon and all that he's built up there, can he not let coaching get in the way of that? Because the amount of times that Dan Lanning has coached his way to a loss versus let his team win is insane. And you can honestly point to a couple of those moments in the Washington games against Washington where Oregon maybe could be 2-1 against Washington in the last three if Dan makes a few different calls. So that'll be kind of the Ryan Day question, if you will, right? Where he's got so much talent, he's got this big infrastructure, but can he actually coach it into existence? Where I'm not saying Ryan Day can't coach, but I'm just saying, like,
Sure.
can
Yeah.
can can you make can you
Yeah.
not can you not make those coaching blunders? And that's the one thing that Kalen DeBoer never did. Never really had a coaching blunder
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
every single thing he hit on. So I completely agree that Oregon and Lanning go into the Big Ten in much better shape. But I think that's kind of why we still play the games because, for all that Oregon has and for all that Ohio State has, and just run down the list of marquee programs, that's why coaching at the end of the day will always be the ultimate separator because you can have the greatest talent, but if you can't coach that talent and if you can't get that talent to make adjustments in a game, it doesn't matter. So I think that would be the key for Lanning. And I asked him at Pac-12 Media Day last July, so what do you have to do differently to have a positive result against Washington this time around? He's like, got to finish. Got to finish. What did he not do the last two times this year? Didn't finish. Didn't finish in October. Didn't finish in December. So part of it, because I completely agree. And I think Lanning is a fantastic coach. But there's an enigma about him that just says, okay, you're really good, but somehow you're not letting yourself be as good as you possibly could be. So if he can make that coaching change, I mean, just in his own head, can he make the right calls? Can he learn from his mistakes over the past couple of years? He will absolutely be able to capitalize on his position in the Big Ten. But that's where Jed Fish says, hey, not so fast. I'm the offensive guy here. See if you can defend this.
I like the day landing parallel. And folks, we'll get to it. I know you're all in the chat about this. We will take your calls and get to it. But yeah, we know that they're both good. They got the job because they're good, and then they've both proven, Day even more so, that they're good in the job. But the job, especially at Ohio State, but even at Oregon, demands great. And can you be great? Well, they haven't been great yet. So, and sometimes, especially looking at the landing decisions in Seattle in particular in the first game, it's not always about making the great decision. It's almost like, what is a quarterback instructed to do at the line of scrimmage? He's instructed to get out of a bad play. But if he's in a good play, he doesn't gamble that there's going to be miscommunication because he sees the possibility of a great play. We got a good play against the defense, just run it. But if you got a bad play, get out of the bad play. And in coaching, sometimes it's not that you got to make some remarkable play call or anything. Just don't mess up.
Yep, exactly. And that's the beauty of 18 to 22-year-old kids or 24-year-old kids is, sometimes some of them have easier times making those decisions and sometimes they don't. And it's exactly the same thing with Washington, where you look at a number of calls they made where it was always right, where the 4th-and-1 against Washington State in your own territory, going for it in a tie ball game, right? Where Lanning goes for it, doesn't get it. So it's a matter of the right idea to go for it on certain times, but do you have the right players to execute? And again, it's at the same point, it's hard to fault Bo Nix because the guy's a competitor and a warrior. So I think there's the last 2 years of Dan Lanning kind of made him be what he's going to become in 24. Where I think he's gonna have to learn, and I think he's smart enough that he's gonna learn from those mistakes and say, did we put those guys in the right position? Are we doing this the right way? Are we doing this? And I think moving into the Big Ten, it's going to be a test, but I do think he's up to the challenge just as Jed Fish is.
I don't know if they're playing this year. I don't believe they are, but it will be the ultimate test in terms of coaching differences to see Dan Lanning on one sideline and Kirk Ferentz on the other, because either Lanning's team will probably beat them into submission, or if otherwise, because Ferentz, he doesn't blink, he doesn't budge. They know who they are and what they're doing, and he may get Lanning into the kind of game that Dan Lanning can't stand, and will lose patience and go for it on fourth down every time they get and just play into Kirk Ferentz's hands. I don't know. That'll be fascinating to see. But again, I don't believe they match up this year. But
No, Washington plays Iowa,
yeah,
so I think Oregon plays Iowa in 25.